were two events with the author Angie Thomas, who's the author of our 2020 Vermont Reads book, The Hate You Give, that were held at the end of May. And they were 2 nights in a row. And I felt very blessed to be part of those.
I have to believe that books are one of the greatest ways, one of the best ways to evoke compassion.
She did a presentation and then engaged in conversation with the Vermont State Librarian at the time, Jason Broughton, about her work. And I really enjoyed their rapport. I really enjoyed the questions that Jason had thought of and the questions that the people in the audience had thought of. And I really liked getting to know Angie better.
Do you remember the first book that you felt you could never put down? It could be a children's book, a picture book, a book in college. What was your first book, if you can remember that?
Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. That was the one. It was about a Black girl in Mississippi, and I was a Black girl in Mississippi. I remember getting that book from the library, and I had a couple of late fees. I'm sorry to all the librarians.
The one that stuck with me a little bit more was the event the next day, sort of mid-morning, which was for Vermont students. And we got some very touching stories of, people on Twitter saying, I'm walking through the halls at our high school and I'm hearing Angie Thomas's voice coming out of every room. And we had probably around 2,500 people that we know of were logged in to listen to her. And then she was joined by a panel of, I think it was 5 Vermont high school students who interacted with her and asked her questions, and they had this great dialogue. And then when it ended, we regrouped in a different Zoom room to talk with the students about how that went, and some of them were crying. One of them said that was the best thing that has happened this year, or happened for a long time. And one of them might have even said, in my life. They just, really was special to them to get to spend that time with an author whose works mean a lot to them.
The first thing that comes to mind as a highlight is the humanities camp that was run by Miranda Miller at Blake Memorial Library in East Corinth. They took the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer and partnered with Lynn Murphy, who's is a local Beneke ethnobotanist. Some of the highlight was just going to visit and walking a mile from the library out into the forest, and seeing them working on projects that Lynn had taught them, sort of traditional skills, making burn bowls, but also writing on their own, talking to each other. There were kids out sitting on rocks in the river, just sitting and thinking and writing and journaling, and just going into a space like that and thinking, this is the humanities, this is what it is. This is a classroom. This is academic. This kind of engagement with the natural world and each other is, it is what makes us human. Then walking back out of the woods, again, that mile walk out of the woods to the library with those kids and talking to them, some of them 17, some of them 8, it was a huge span of ages, and hearing them talk about the book. They hadn't finished reading it. They read snippets, but that was more valuable because they had things they were excited to look up about it or continue reading, but also just feeling really grateful for educators like Miranda and Lynn, seeing the value in completely stripping away any sort of traditional trappings of an academic setting, and in doing so, creating a really incredible, valuable learning experience.
I would say I enjoyed all of our Words in the Woods because it was summer when it was being done, and I really enjoyed the production of it. It made me feel very I mean, it felt very much alive. So I appreciated that. And the first one that we did with Shanta Lee Gander in Guilford, we ended up having a Zoom conversation to go with the recording. And it was myself and the former community programs officer, Rachel, and Shanta.
Heritage. You've mentioned to me, that you have, Southern American heritage. That's, where I come from. So I really do feel kinship always with, because it's its own thing. Yes, for better or worse, it's its own thing.
I mean, I was just really excited just to get us all three virtually in the room. But what ended up coming out of it was a very thoughtful and interesting dialogue and meditation on what it means to live in Vermont and what it means to be an artist and what it means to be what it means to take up space. And we were able to also talk about all that in the context of all three of us were identifying Black women.
You can't say, especially Black voices being marginalized, when that is the foundation of all civilization. Our economic systems, the free labor, the forced labor, we are the foundation. We are the all. So, but it's a great mental exercise to keep reminding people where they belong.
I went back to it like maybe a week later, and I remember just looking at how the conversation was flowing and just like being really, really proud that we were able to have that and not only to have it, but to also share it.
So one of my highlights for 2021 was certainly our conference on climate change. It didn't perhaps come off exactly the way that we had hoped it would. We had planned to have a live conference with people gathering again, and we largely weren't able to do that. But we did have 10 sessions, and one of the things that I really loved about having them all happen over the course of about 2.5 weeks was the ability for us to kind of see how each speaker, each humanist, each scholar that we brought in really built upon the work of the previous scholar. We had wonderful folks like even Professor Adrienne Avafiev, Middlebury scholar Bill McKibben, Susan Evans McClure from the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum talking about climate change and archaeology. And then we were able to close with a large live event. We worked hard to make it safe. In partnership with the Lane Series and the University of Vermont, we gathered at the Redstone campus to hear the Fry Street Quartet present their Crossroads project. Who would have really thought that there would be chamber music that addressed issues of climate change? But it was a beautiful, beautiful evening filled with 200 people, including probably about 50 students.
Enveloped in the sound of a string quartet. I found myself thinking, 200,000 years ago, we humans just woke up on this island of a planet.
The concert was incredible. The storytelling from the biophysicists that traveled with them really added a tremendous amount of value to the event, and the beautiful projections behind the string quartet really completed the evening.
I think that was a highlight for lots of reasons, in part because of the time that we're in and the chance to enjoy music in a group is kind of rare at this point. I've always had a pretty strong connection to music, so that in itself is always very powerful for me to share with others. And I think afterward we had a really great discussion on the staff, just out in the lobby with some of our board members as well about, it's easy to be overwhelmed, as a single human confronted by the suffering of a whole planet. and how urgent it feels and how small our efforts can feel in comparison to the needs for change that are out there. But it was really beautiful to see that growth, that emotion, and that desire for change to grow and be inspired, out of music. When you can share more communal emotional experiences, that takes on more of your whole being, which I think is what makes it more powerful and more connecting with others, so that you don't feel isolated in yourself.